He believed he was the darkness that would extinguish her light. But what does his opinion matter when fate has a mind of its own? The rain against the enchanted glass ceiling of the ministry atrium didn't tap. It thrummed, a heavy, rhythmic bass note beneath the soaring soprano of string quartets and polite laughter. It was the night of the Winter Solstice Gala, an event designed to look like a celebration, but felt, to Hermione Granger, remarkably like an inspection. The air was thick, perfumed with winter roses, expensive cologne, and the ozone scent of high-grade preservation charms. Thousands of floating candles drifted like golden constellations above the heads of the wizarding elite, casting a soft, flattering light that smoothed wrinkles and hid lies. Hermione stood near the center of the room, a flute of champagne warming in her hand, feeling entirely too visible. She wore deep emerald velvet, a concession to the festive season, the fabric clinging to her frame in a way that felt foreign, exposing the slope of her shoulders to the cool draft of the hall. "You really are the architect of the new era, aren't you, Hermione?" The voice was warm, rich, and too close. Julian Vance, a senior undersecretary with a smile that had graced the cover of Witch Weekly 3 times this year, stepped into her personal space. He was handsome in a conventional, sun-drenched way, sandy hair, easy charm, a laugh that invited everyone to join in. He was safe, he was acceptable, and he was currently placing a hand on the small of her back. Hermione stiffened, a microscopic reaction she hoped he wouldn't notice. The heat of his palm seeped through the velvet, possessive and presumptive. "Hardly an architect, Julian," she deflected, forcing a tight smile. "Just someone trying to ensure the foundation doesn't crumble again." "Always so modest." Julian laughed, leaning in. He smelled of spiced rum and confidence. His fingers splayed slightly, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin just above her hip. "It's charming, but you need to learn to take a compliment. Tonight, for instance, you look absolutely devastating." He lowered his voice on the last word, turning a professional observation into an intimate whisper. It was a well-rehearsed move. Hermione felt the weight of the room's attention. They were a tableau, the war heroine and the rising political star. A perfect match. Across the room, in the shadows cast by a towering marble pillar, Draco Malfoy watched. He stood with the stillness of a statue, dressed in black robes, cut with a severity that made him look like a sleek, dangerous weapon amidst the colourful plumage of the other guests. He held a tumbler of fire whiskey, the amber liquid untouched. His eyes, cold and pale as winter ice, were fixed on the hand resting on Hermione's waist. He felt a familiar, corrosive acid rise in his throat. It wasn't anger. Anger was hot, impulsive, Gryffindorish. This was something colder. It was a precise, agonizing clarity. He watched Vance lean closer to her ear. He saw the subtle tension in Hermione's jaw, the way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She was smiling, but her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for air. Vance didn't see it. Vance saw a prize to be won. He didn't see the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes or the way she shifted her weight, ready to flee. He didn't know her. "I know her," Draco thought, the thought ringing like a bell in the silence of his mind. The jealousy that gripped him wasn't a fire, it was a vice. It tightened his chest, constricting his breath. He hated the way Vance touched her with such ease, such entitlement. But more than that, he hated the distance between himself and her, a chasm built of years of history, prejudice, and his own cowardly silence. He could stay here. He could finish his drink, turn on his heel, and leave. That was the Malfoy way. Observe, judge, withdraw. Vance whispered something else, and Hermione laughed, a brittle, high sound that grated on Draco's nerves. Vance's hand moved, sliding just an inch higher. The vice in Draco's chest snapped. He set his glass down on a passing tray with a deliberate clink. The sound was soft, but for him, it was a gavel falling. He adjusted his cufflinks, silver snakes biting their own tails, and stepped out of the shadows. He didn't rush. He moved through the crowd like smoke, fluid and inevitable. People parted for him, instinctually sensing the shift in the air. The temperature seemed to drop around him, the golden warmth of the party chilling into something sharper, more alert. He approached them from behind, his gaze never leaving the back of Vance's neck. "I hope I'm not interrupting a state secret," Draco said. His voice was low, smooth, and laced with a deadly kind of politeness. Vance jumped slightly, his hand falling from Hermione's back as he turned. Hermione spun around, and for a fleeting second, the mask of polite tolerance dropped from her face, replaced by genuine surprise. Her eyes met Draco's, and he saw the sudden intake of breath, the dilation of her pupils. "Malfoy," Vance said, his smile faltering before he pasted it back on. "We were just discussing the upcoming legislative session." "Fascinating," Draco drawled, stepping into the circle of their conversation. He didn't look at Vance. He looked entirely, exclusively at Hermione. "Because I was under the impression, Granger, that we needed to review the rune sequences for the intricate warding on the archives. Unless, of course, you've decided to let the Department of Mysteries handle the entropy calculations." It was nonsense. Or at least, it was work that didn't need to be discussed at a gala. But it was a language only they spoke. It was a reference to late nights in the library, to shared coffees, to the reluctant, fragile partnership they had built over the last 2 years. Hermione stared at him. She saw the tension in his jaw, the rigidity of his posture. She saw the way he was ignoring Vance completely, dismissing the other man's existence with effortless arrogance. "The entropy calculations," she repeated, her voice steadying. She understood. "Yes, I was concerned about the third variable." "As you should be," Draco said softly. He took a half step closer, invading the space Vance had been occupying moments ago. But unlike Vance, Draco didn't touch her. He didn't need to. His presence was a physical weight, surrounding her, shielding her. "Vance, you'll excuse us. Technical matters. Terribly dry." Vance looked between them, sensing a current he couldn't navigate. He looked at Hermione, waiting for her to dismiss Malfoy, to return to the warmth of his flirtation. Hermione didn't look back at him. "It is important, Julian. I'm sorry. Excuse me." She stepped toward Draco. It was a choice. A small one, but a choice nonetheless. Draco offered her his arm. It was a formal gesture, stiff and proper, but his eyes were burning. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then laid her hand on his forearm. Her fingers were warm against the cool wool of his sleeve. The contact sent a shockwave up his arm, settling heavily in his gut. "Shall we?" he murmured. He led her away, cutting a path through the throng. He didn't speak as they navigated the room. his expression stony, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He was acutely aware of the heat of her body next to his, the rustle of her velvet dress, the scent of her perfume, vanilla and old parchment, rising above the cloying roses of the gala. He guided her not toward the offices, but toward the large glass doors that led to the semi-private observation balcony. "Draco," she whispered, as the noise of the party began to fade behind them. "The archives are closed." "I know," he said, his voice rougher now. He pushed the doors open. The sound of the rain exploded around them, muffled only slightly by the overhead shielding charms. The air out here was cold, crisp and clean. The city of London sprawled below them, a grid of wet, glittering lights through the storm. He let the heavy doors swing shut, sealing them off from the warmth and the music. The silence that followed was sudden and heavy. Draco finally turned to face her. He didn't let go of her arm immediately. He looked down at her, his grey eyes searching her face, cataloguing every detail. The flush on her cheeks, the way a loose curl had fallen across her forehead, the pulse beating rapidly in her throat. "You looked like you were drowning," he said quietly. Hermione let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for an hour. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself, though the chill wasn't entirely from the cold. "He's persistent," she admitted, leaning back against the stone railing. The damp wind whipped at the hem of her dress. "He's a good man, Draco. He means well." "He's a bore," Draco corrected sharply, stepping closer. "And he doesn't know when to stop touching what doesn't belong to him." The words hung in the air, dangerous and unspoken. Hermione looked up, her eyes widening. "What doesn't belong to him?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "And what does that imply, exactly?" Draco froze. The mask threatened to slip. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to say that Vance looked at her and saw a trophy, but Draco looked at her and saw the only person who made the world make sense. He wanted to say that watching another man's hands on her made him want to burn the ministry to the ground. But he couldn't. Not yet. He wasn't the hero of this story. He was the villain who had been granted a reprieve, and he was terrified that one wrong move would shatter the fragile truce between them. So he retreated just an inch. He built the wall back up, but he left a window open. "It implies," Draco said, his voice lowering to a husky timbre, "that you are not a public monument, Granger. You don't have to let people climb all over you just because they voted for you." He reached out then. It was a slow, deliberate movement. His hand hovered for a second before his fingers grazed her temple, tucking the stray curl behind her ear. His skin was cool against her burning cheek. He didn't pull away immediately. His fingers lingered on the shell of her ear, his thumb brushing her jawline. It was a touch so light it was almost a ghost, but the intimacy of it was staggering. Hermione stopped breathing. She stared at him, her lips parted, her eyes locked on his. She didn't pull away. She leaned ever so slightly into his hand. "Draco," she breathed. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. "Stay here," he commanded softly, his eyes dropping to her mouth before snapping back to her eyes. "Stay here where it's quiet. If you go back in there, I can't promise I won't curse him." "You can't curse a senior undersecretary," she whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Watch me," he murmured. He dropped his hand, the loss of contact leaving a cold spot on her skin. He took a step back, giving her air, but his eyes never left hers. The tension between them was a physical thing, a taut wire vibrating in the storm. "I prefer the rain anyway," Hermione said, her voice stronger now, grounded. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the pure-blood sneer he wore like armor. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the protectiveness in his stance. "Good," Draco said. He turned to look out at the city, leaning his elbows on the railing next to her, close enough that their arms brushed. "Then we'll wait." They stood in the silence, the rain hammering against the invisible shield above them. Draco didn't look at her again, but he didn't need to. He could feel her presence like a heartbeat next to him. He hadn't won the war, but in this moment, standing in the cold with her while Vance remained inside the golden cage, Draco Malfoy felt a savage, possessive victory. He had chosen to act, and she had let him. The morning light in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was never kind. It filtered through the enchanted windows in a pale, sterile grey that seemed to leach the colour from the world, leaving only the sharp edges of reality. For Hermione Granger, sitting at her desk buried under a fortress of parchment, the stark brightness was a headache waiting to bloom. She was staring at a report on standardized cauldron thickness, but the words swam before her eyes, refusing to coalesce into meaning. Her mind was not on cauldrons. It was not on the backlog of legislation to her left, nor the simmering pot of tea that had long since gone cold to her right. Her mind was stuck on a balcony. She raised a hand, her fingers hovering hesitantly before brushing against her own cheek. The skin there felt normal, cool, dry. But beneath the surface, a phantom heat lingered, the ghost of Draco Malfoy's touch. "You are not a public monument, Granger." The words echoed in the silence of her office, vibrating with a timbre that was low, possessive, and terrifyingly gentle. She squeezed her eyes shut, exhaling a sharp breath through her nose. It was absurd. It was irrational. It was Malfoy. For years, he had been a sharp angle in her life, a source of friction, a reminder of a past she had fought to survive. Even in their recent professional overlap, he had been distant, his competence wrapped in a layer of aristocratic ice. But last night, the ice had cracked. Or perhaps she had simply seen what lay beneath it for the first time. And then, just as quickly as it had happened, he had vanished. After the balcony, he had escorted her back to the flu network with the rigidity of a royal guard, bid her a clipped goodnight without meeting her eyes, and disappeared into the green flames. A sharp knock on her doorframe shattered the memory. Hermione jolted, her hand snapping away from her face as if she'd been caught doing something illicit. "Enter," she said, her voice sounding a little too breathless to her own ears. The door creaked open, and the air in the small office seemed to instantly thin, sucked out by the presence of the man standing on the threshold. Draco Malfoy looked as though he had never stepped foot on a balcony, let alone touched her. He was pristine. His robes were a severe charcoal grey, tailored to an inch of his life, fastening high at the throat. His hair was combed back with sleek precision, not a single strand out of place. He held a leather satchel in one hand and a look of supreme boredom on his face. "Granger," he said. His voice was flat, a dead thing. "Malfoy," she replied, straightening in her chair, instinctively reaching for her quill as a shield. "I wasn't expecting you until the afternoon briefing." "Plans change," he said, stepping into the room. He didn't sit. He moved to the shelves lining the opposite wall, inspecting the spines of her books with critical detachment. The archives are growing unstable. The entropy calculations we discussed last night need to be verified immediately. The ambient magic is fluctuating. He didn't look at her when he mentioned last night. He looked at a copy of Hogwarts, a history. Hermione felt a flash of irritation. So that was it. They were pretending. He was rebuilding the wall brick by brick, mortaring it with indifference. "I see," she said, her tone cooling to match his. She stood up, smoothing the front of her robes. "Then we shouldn't waste time." The walk to the deep archives was silent. The lift rattled downwards, passing level after level, the cheerful paper airplanes of the upper floors giving way to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the lower depths. They stood on opposite sides of the lift cage. Draco stared at the brass grill. Hermione stared at the floor. The space between them was charged, thick with static, but neither moved to bridge it. When the doors opened onto the archive level, the smell hit them. Dust, ozone, and the metallic tang of ancient, slumbering magic. The room was vast, a cavernous library of forbidden and forgotten things, illuminated only by the floating blue orbs of witchlight. "Section 7, Draco commanded, striding forward. "The runic warding stone." They reached the large circular stone table in the center of the section. Etched into its surface were thousands of minute runes, glowing faintly with a pulsing, erratic rhythm. This was the heart of the Ministry's protective woven spells, and it was indeed fluctuating. Draco set his satchel down and began to roll up his sleeves. It was a mundane action, but Hermione found herself transfixed by the movement, the precise unbuttoning of the cuffs, the reveal of the dark mark faded to a scar on his left forearm, the unexpected strength in his wrists. He caught her looking. His eyes snapped to hers, grey flint striking steel. For a second, the mask slipped, revealing a flash of defensive anger. He pulled the sleeve down slightly, covering the mark, before pushing it back up with defiant aggression. "Is there a problem, Granger?" he bit out. "No," she said quickly, flushing. "I was just checking the alignment." "Check the stone, not me," he muttered, turning his attention to the runes. "The tertiary sequence is bleeding energy. We need to anchor it." They worked in tandem, falling into a rhythm that was purely cerebral. This was where they made sense. When they were arguing theory, correcting each other's arithmancy, or weaving complex spellwork, the social baggage fell away. Hermione was brilliant, and Draco was precise. She was the raw power and the intuitive leap. He was the structure and the control. "You're rushing the syntax," Draco murmured half an hour later. He was standing close to her now, both of them leaning over the stone table. "If you bind the Fehu rune too quickly, it will shatter the containment." "It won't shatter if I stabilize it with a counterclockwise flow," Hermione argued, her wand tip glowing with a soft golden light as she traced the air above the stone. "The energy needs somewhere to go, Draco. You can't just box it in." "You always want to let things run wild," he countered, his voice low. He reached out, his wand intercepting hers. His hand didn't touch hers, but his magic did. The tip of his hawthorn wand brushed against the vinewood of hers. A spark, bright and hot, jumped between the cores. Hermione gasped, the sensation travelling down her arm like a physical caress, settling heavy in her stomach. Draco froze. He didn't pull back. He held the connection, his wand pressing against hers, guiding her movement. "Control, Granger," he whispered. The word was a breath against the heavy silence of the room. "You have to contain it. If you let it spill over, it destroys everything." He wasn't talking about the runes. Hermione turned her head. His face was inches from hers. In the blue witchlight, the sharp angles of his cheekbones were softened, his eyes dark pools of conflict. He looked exhausted. Beneath the pristine exterior, she saw the tension holding him together, the wire pulled so tight it was humming. "Some things," Hermione whispered back, her voice trembling slightly, "aren't meant to be contained." She saw his gaze drop to her lips. It was involuntary, a reflex he tried to suppress instantly, his jaw tightening. The air between them crackled, the smell of ozone intensifying until it tasted like a thunderstorm on her tongue. He was going to kiss her. The realization hit Hermione with the force of a stunning spell. He was leaning in, the gravitational pull of him undeniable. And she wasn't moving away. She was tilting her chin up, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Do it," she thought. A dangerous, reckless plea. Break the line. Draco's eyes fluttered shut for a brief second, his breath hitching. He leaned closer, his scent, expensive soap, parchment, and something distinctly him, filling her senses. Then the runic stone flared. A sharp crack echoed through the room as the unstable magic they had neglected for a moment too long snapped. A wave of force pushed outward. Draco reacted instantly. He didn't shield himself. He threw his arm out, catching Hermione around the waist and hauling her back, spinning them so his body was between her and the stone. They collided with the bookshelf behind them, the impact jarring the air from Hermione's lungs. Draco was pressed hard against her, his chest heaving, his arm like an iron bar across her back, pinning her to the rows of leather-bound archives. Silence rushed back into the room, heavier than before. They were tangled together, legs interlocked, chest to chest. Hermione's hands were clutching the lapels of his robes. Draco's face was buried in the curve of her neck, his breathing ragged. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Hermione could feel the rapid, thudding beat of his heart against her own. It was frantic, mortal, real. Slowly, agonizingly, Draco lifted his head. He looked down at her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression was devastating. There was no sneer, no mask, just a man who was terrified of the thing he was holding, and terrified of letting it go. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was rough, stripped of all pretense. "No," Hermione breathed. She was shaking. Draco. The use of his given name seemed to snap him back to reality. The softness vanished from his eyes, replaced by a wall of sudden, cold panic. He realized where he was. He realized he was pressing Hermione Granger against a bookshelf in the dark, and that he had prioritized her safety over his own without a second thought. He pulled away as if he had been burned. Draco stumbled back a step, smoothing his robes with hands that weren't entirely steady. He turned his back to her, facing the glowing stone table. "The surge is contained," he said. His voice was robotic, devoid of the heat that had just consumed them. "That was careless. We were careless." Hermione slumped against the shelf, her legs feeling like water. The loss of his warmth was a physical ache. "Careless?" she repeated, a spark of indignation igniting in her chest. "You saved me." I secured the asset, Draco corrected harshly, glancing over his shoulder. His expression was sneering again, but it looked brittle now, a cracked porcelain facade. The department cannot afford to lose its golden girl to a rune malfunction. Think of the paperwork. It was a lie. A cruel, clumsy lie designed to create distance. Hermione stared at him, hurt, warring with understanding. She saw the way his hand was clenched into a fist at his side. She saw the rigid line of his shoulders. He was repulsing her because he had come too close. He was retreating because the alternative was something he didn't believe he was allowed to have. Is that all this is? Hermione asked quietly, pushing herself off the bookshelf. She took a step toward him. Paperwork and assets? Draco didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he looked at her now, disheveled, eyes bright with challenge, lips swollen from how hard she had been biting them, he would shatter. "Finish the sequence, Granger," he said, his voice low and final. "I have a meeting with the minister." He grabbed his satchel from the table, not checking the contents. He strode toward the lift without waiting for her, his stride long and desperate. "Draco!" she called out. He paused at the lift grill, his hand gripping the metal bars until his knuckles turned white. He didn't look back. "Don't," he warned, the single word hanging in the air like a blade. The lift arrived with a cheerful ding that sounded obscene in the heavy atmosphere. Draco stepped inside, the metal gate sliding shut between them. Hermione stood alone in the dim blue light of the archives. The silence returned, but the tension didn't leave. It swirled around her, mixed with the smell of ozone and the lingering ghost of his scent. She touched her waist where his arm had held her with a desperation that betrayed every cold word he had spoken. He could run. He could hide behind his walls and his sneers and his pure-blood repression. But he had slipped. And Hermione Granger, the brightest witch of her age, had never been one to leave a puzzle unsolved. She looked at the lift where he had vanished, her fear slowly transmuting into something steelier, something determined. "Run while you can, Malfoy," she whispered to the empty room, because next time she wouldn't let him let go. 3 days of silence had passed since the incident in the archives. 3 days where the air in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement felt thin, brittle, and suffocating. Draco Malfoy had become a master of evasion. He was a ghost in the corridors, a shadow in the briefings, present but entirely unreachable. Now they were miles from the safety of the Ministry, standing on the jagged, wind-battered edge of the Isle of Skye. The assignment was mandatory. A fractured ley line had been reported near the ruins of an old watchtower, bleeding raw magic into the Muggle atmosphere. It was dangerous, unstable work. Exactly the kind of work Draco usually delegated to junior Aurors. But he had volunteered. And because he had volunteered, Hermione had insisted on coming. The wind here was a physical assault. It tore at their cloaks, screaming over the blackened heather and the slate-grey rocks. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that felt less like weather and more like a curse. Draco walked 10 paces ahead of her. He had been maintaining that exact distance since they apparated. He moved with a grim determination, his head bowed against the gale, his black coat whipping around his legs like smoke. Hermione watched him, her boots slipping on the wet, moss-slicked stones. She was exhausted. Not just from the hike, but from the mental effort of trying to solve the puzzle that was Draco Malfoy. He was punishing himself. She could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, in the way he refused to use a warming charm despite the biting cold, as if he felt he deserved the freeze. The fracture point should be just beyond the ridge, Hermione called out, her voice snatched away by the wind almost instantly. Draco didn't turn. He simply raised a gloved hand in acknowledgement and kept climbing. Hermione grit her teeth and followed. The path narrowed, winding up a steep incline of loose shale. She placed a foot on a slate slab that looked stable, but the moment she shifted her weight, the earth gave way. With a sharp gasp, she slid backward. Rock scraped against her shin, and for a terrifying second, gravity took hold. Draco! Before she could even scramble for purchase, a hand clamped around her wrist. It was a vice grip, bruising and desperate. Draco had moved with seeker speed, pivoting and lunging down the slope to catch her. He hauled her up with a grunt of exertion, pulling her onto the flat plateau of the ridge. The momentum threw her against him. For the second time in a week, they were chest to chest, the cold world narrowing down to the heat of his body. But this time, he didn't freeze. He shoved her away. It wasn't violent, but it was forceful, a decisive rejection. He released her wrist as if her skin were acidic. "Watch where you're going, Granger," he snarled. His face was pale, his eyes wild and rimmed with red, as if he hadn't slept in days. The wind whipped his platinum hair across his forehead. "I don't have time to scrape you off the rocks." Hermione stumbled back, regaining her balance. The adrenaline of the fall was instantly replaced by a flare of anger. "I slipped," she snapped, brushing the dirt from her cloak. "And you don't have to look at me like I'm a contagion." "Then stop acting like a liability," he countered, turning his back on her immediately. "Let's finish this. I want to leave." He marched toward the ruins of the watchtower, a hollowed-out stone shell standing stark against the darkening horizon. They reached the center of the ruins. The air here hummed with wrongness. The grass was dead, scorched in a perfect circle, and the taste of metal was heavy on the tongue. The ley line was definitely fractured. "It's leaking dark resonance," Draco muttered, kneeling by the scorched earth. He pulled his wand, running a diagnostic pattern over the ground. His movements were jerky, lacking their usual fluid grace. "We need to cauterize the flow before we can seal it. If we cauterize it too fast, the backlash will trigger a magical storm," Hermione warned, stepping up beside him. She kept her distance, mindful of his earlier hostility. "We need to siphon the excess energy first." "There isn't time," Draco said through gritted teeth. He looked up at the sky. The bruised clouds were swirling, forming a funnel directly above them. "Look." Thunder rumbled, deep and tectonic. The air pressure dropped so sharply Hermione's ears popped. "It's reacting to our presence," she realized, horror dawning. "The magic. It's feeding on the active cause." "Brilliant deduction," Draco spat. He stood up, abandoning the diagnostic. "We have to take cover. Now!" He didn't wait for her agreement. He grabbed her arm, again, that utilitarian, impersonal grip, and dragged her toward the only shelter remaining, the semi-intact ground floor of the tower. They ducked under the crumbling stone archway just as the sky tore open. It wasn't rain that fell. It was hail the size of snitches, mixed with jagged bolts of raw purple lightning that struck the ground with the sound of cracking whips. The interior of the tower was small, damp, and smelled of centuries of rot. But the stone walls were thick. Draco released her and immediately moved to the far side of the small enclosure, putting the maximum possible distance between them. He leaned against the damp wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the dirt floor, one leg drawn up, his head resting back against the stone. He closed his eyes. The storm raged outside, a cacophony of violence. Inside, the silence was worse. Hermione cast a lumos, the blue light casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. She looked at Draco. He looked wrecked. The arrogance was gone, stripped away by the cold and the exhaustion. He looked like a man holding up the sky, waiting for his arms to break. She sat down on a fallen stone block opposite him. "Draco," she said softly. "Don't," he whispered without opening his eyes. "Don't what? Don't speak? Don't breathe?" Hermione's voice trembled with frustration. "You've barely looked at me since the archives. You treat me like I've committed a crime against you. What is it? Is it because I almost kissed you?" Draco's eyes snapped open. In the dim light, they were silver blades. "You didn't almost kiss me, Granger. I almost made a mistake. There is a difference." "A mistake?" Hermione repeated, the words stinging. "Is that what I am? A lapse in judgment?" "You are a complication." Draco's voice rose, cracking with sudden intensity. He sat up, the apathy vanishing into agitation. "You are the one thing in my life that is clear and legitimate and good. And I am trying very hard to keep you that way. By freezing me out? By keeping you away from the blast radius," he shouted. The sound echoed off the stone walls, momentarily drowning out the storm. Draco raked a hand through his hair, dislodging the sleek style, leaving it messy and human. He looked at her with a mix of fury and despair. "Do you know what day it is, Granger?" he asked, his voice dropping to a hollow whisper. Hermione frowned, calculating. "It's November 1st. November 1st, he repeated. He began to unbutton the cuff of his left sleeve. His fingers shook. He rolled the fabric up past his wrist, past the pale skin of his forearm, revealing the dark mark. It was faded, a jagged scar of grey against the white, but tonight it looked angry. The skin around it was red, irritated. "On Samhain, on the anniversary, the magic in it remembers," Draco said, staring at the mark with unmasked revulsion. "It burns. It feels like he is still there, crawling under my skin. It bleeds a dark residue into my magical core. Why do you think I volunteered for this suicide mission? I needed to be away from people. I needed to be somewhere where the darkness in me wouldn't stain anyone else." He looked up at her, his expression shattering. "And then you came. You followed me. You, of all people." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "I am sitting here, fighting the urge to scratch this thing off my arm, leaking dark magic, and you are standing there shining like a bloody beacon. Do you have any idea how much I hate myself when I'm near you? Because all I want to do is reach out and take that light, and I know that if I touch you, I will only dim you." Hermione sat frozen. The revelation hung in the cold air, heavy and tragic. He wasn't rejecting her because he didn't want her. He was rejecting her because he thought he was contagious. He saw himself as a vessel of residual evil, and her as something too pure to be risked. It was so classically, stupidly Draco. Hermione stood up. "Stay back," Draco warned, pressing himself deeper into the shadows. I'm not stable, Hermione. The ley line, the mark, I can't control the resonance. I don't care about the resonance, she said. She crossed the small space between them. She didn't rush. She moved with the same deliberate purpose she used when approached a terrified magical creature. She knelt in the dirt in front of him. He flinched, turning his face away, hiding his shame. "Look at me," she commanded gently. He didn't move. Hermione reached out. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she placed her fingertips directly on his left forearm, right on the mark. Draco hissed, his whole body seizing. "Stop! It's vile. Don't touch it." "It's skin, Draco," she said firmly. Her fingers were warm against the cold, scarred tissue. She traced the faded outline of the snake, not with fear, but with reverence for the survival it represented. "It's ink and scar tissue. It's not him. He's dead. This is just a memory." "It's a brand," he choked out, his breathing ragged. "It marks me as his." "No," Hermione whispered. She slid her hand down until her palm rested flat against the mark, covering it completely. "It marks you as someone who lived through a nightmare and came out the other side. It marks you as a survivor, just like me." She used her other hand to pull up her own sleeve, revealing the jagged letters carved into her arm. Mudblood. She placed her arm next to his. The scars mirrored each other, one dark, one pale, both violent, both permanent. "We both carry ghosts, Draco," she said, her voice fierce. "You don't get to decide that yours are worse. You don't get to decide that you're too damaged for me. I'm the only one who gets to make that choice. And I am telling you, I am not afraid of your darkness." Draco turned his head slowly. He looked at their arms side by side. Then he looked up at her face. The self-loathing in his eyes was warring with something else, something desperate and hopeful. "You should be," he whispered, but he didn't pull his arm away. "Maybe," Hermione admitted, "but I'm not." The storm outside seemed to recede, or maybe they just stopped hearing it. In the damp, cold ruins of the tower, a different kind of energy shifted between them. It wasn't the electric, sexual tension of the archives. It was something deeper. It was an anchor dropping into the seabed. Draco turned his hand over, his fingers curling around her wrist, covering her scar just as she covered his. His thumb brushed over the raised letters of Mudblood. His touch was featherlight, apologetic. "I watched her do this to you," he murmured, his voice thick with ancient guilt. "And I did nothing." "You're doing something now," Hermione said. "You're staying." Draco let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension in his shoulders finally broke. He slumped forward, his forehead resting against her shoulder. It was a gesture of complete surrender. Hermione wrapped her arms around him, holding him as he shook. She could feel the cold radiating off him, but beneath it there was warmth. There was a man. They stayed like that for a long time, huddled together in the dirt while the storm raged itself out. There were no kisses, no grand declarations, just the quiet, heavy intimacy of shared pain. Draco didn't push her away again. When the hail finally stopped and the purple sky began to fade into a dull, bruising grey, they emerged from the tower. The ley line had stabilized on its own, the pressure released by the storm. They walked back to the apparition point in silence. But the distance was gone. Draco walked beside her now, close enough that their arms brushed with every step. Just before they disapparated, Draco paused. He didn't look at her, staring out at the chaotic sea, but he reached out and took her hand. He squeezed it once, hard, a silent message of gratitude, before letting go. "Home," he said. And for the first time, the word didn't sound like a place. It sounded like a possibility. The invitation had not been spoken, but the boundary had been breached. Since their return from the Isle of Skye, the silence between them had shifted. It was no longer a wall. It was a tether. Friday evening in London was a damp, miserable affair. The fog pressed against the windows of Hermione's flat in Hampstead, turning the streetlights into blurred smears of orange. Inside, it was warm. A clutter of books, mismatched throw pillows, and the soft hiss of the radiator. Hermione sat on her sofa, a mug of tea balanced on her knee, staring at the fireplace. The flames were green, flue powder. She wasn't expecting anyone, but the grate flared, spitting ash, and then a figure unfolded from the emerald fire with practiced grace. Draco Malfoy stepped into her living room. He didn't stumble. He brushed a speck of soot from his shoulder, straightened his cuff, and looked around with an expression of critical assessment. He was wearing casual robes, a shocking departure from his ministry armor, soft charcoal wool that made him look less like a weapon and more like a man. "Your wards are abysmal," he announced. No greeting, no preamble. Hermione blinked, the sudden intrusion short-circuiting her brain for a moment. "Hello to you too, Draco. And my wards are standard ministry issue." Standard ministry issue is code for open invitation to anyone with a third-year education, he drawled. He began to walk around the perimeter of her small living room. He moved like a large cat in a new territory, wary, elegant, and entirely out of place among her muggle furniture and stacks of daily profits. He touched the spine of a book, the leaf of a fern, his fingers lingering just long enough to register the texture before moving on. "What are you doing here?" Hermione asked, though she didn't ask him to leave. Her heart had done a traitorous little flip the moment he appeared. "I couldn't sleep," he said simply, his back to her as he inspected a framed photograph of her and Harry on the mantel. "And I started thinking about the ley line resonance. If it tracked back to you, your defenses here wouldn't hold a stiff breeze." It was a lie, or at least a partial truth. He wasn't here because of ley lines. He was here because the silence of his own manor had become deafening, and the memory of her warmth on the Isle of Skye was the only thing that kept the cold at bay. He turned to face her. "May I?" He gestured vaguely with his wand. "You want to reward my flat?" Hermione raised an eyebrow. "On a Friday night?" "I want to ensure my partner doesn't get assassinated in her sleep. It would be inconvenient for my workload." Hermione set her mug down. She saw past the sneer. She saw the restlessness in his hands, the shadows under his eyes. He was seeking proximity, but he needed a function to justify it. He needed to be useful, to be present. "Fine," she said softly. "Go ahead." Draco nodded once. He raised his wand, 10 inches, hawthorn unicorn hair. The air in the room shifted instantly. He began to weave. Hermione watched, mesmerized. She had seen Draco cast spells 1,000 times, but this was different. He wasn't casting, he was building. He moved with a conductor's fluidity, his wand tracing complex, invisible geometries in the air. He murmured incantations in Latin and Gaelic, his voice a low rhythmic hum that seemed to vibrate in her chest. She felt the magic settle over the room like a heavy protective blanket. It was cold and metallic, distinctly Malfoy. It tasted of snow and silver. He moved closer to her, layering the wards around the windows, then the door. He was systematically sealing her in, sealing the world out. He stopped in front of the sofa where she sat. He was breathing slightly harder, a sheen of perspiration on his brow. The air crackled with the residual energy of his work. "Better," he murmured, looking at the ceiling where the new wards shimmered faintly before fading from sight. "It feels heavy," Hermione whispered. "It's safe," Draco corrected. He looked down at her. The distance between them was negligible. Hermione was seated, looking up. Draco was standing, looming over her. The power dynamic was palpable, but it didn't feel threatening. It felt like he was a sentinel, and she was the treasure he had appointed himself to guard. "Tea?" she offered, the domesticity of the question cutting through the magical density. Draco hesitated. His instinct was to run. He had done the job. He had secured the perimeter. He should leave. But the thought of returning to the empty, echoing halls of the manor was physically painful. "Whiskey," he countered, "if you have anything drinkable." Hermione smiled, a small, genuine thing. "Bottom cupboard. It's Ogden's, not the vintage swill you prefer, but it works." Draco poured himself a glass and, to her surprise, topped up her tea with a splash of the amber liquid. He sat on the opposite end of the sofa. Not the armchair, the sofa. He was 2 feet away. They sat in silence for a long time, sipping their drinks. The rain lashed against the window, but it sounded distant now, muffled by the layers of protection Draco had spun. "Why do you have so many things?" Draco asked quietly, gesturing to the chaotic shelves. "It's cluttered." "It's lived in," Hermione defended. "It's not a museum, Draco. It's a home." "A home," he tested the word. He looked at her, his grey eyes softening. "I don't think I've ever lived in a home. I've lived in a manor, a headquarters, a prison, never a home." The vulnerability was back, slipping through the cracks of his composure. Hermione shifted, tucking her legs under her. "You could make one. The manor, you could change it." "You can't change the bones of a place, Granger," he said darkly, staring into his glass. "The walls remember. The floors remember who bled on them." He took a sharp swallow of whiskey. "I feel like a ghost in my own house." "Is that why you're here?" Hermione asked gently. Draco froze. He turned his head, locking eyes with her. The truth hung between them, naked and terrifying. "I'm here," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, "because it is the only place where the noise in my head stops." Hermione's breath hitched. It was a confession of dependence. He was admitting that she was his anchor. "Draco." He set his glass down on the coffee table with a sharp clack. He moved suddenly, shifting his body so he was facing her fully. He reached out, his hand hovering over her knee before he pulled it back, clenching his fist. "I shouldn't be here," he said, the conflict warring in his features. "I am crowding you. I am imposing." "You're not," Hermione said firmly. She reached out and covered his clenched fist with her hand. His skin was cold. Hers was warm. The contrast was shocking. Draco looked at their hands. Slowly, deliberately, he unclenched his fingers. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. It was a tentative, testing gesture. "You don't know what you're doing," he murmured, his thumbs stroking the back of her hand. The rhythm was hypnotic. "You think you're saving a stray dog, Hermione, but I'm not a dog. I'm a wolf." and I will bite." "I'm not trying to save you," Hermione whispered. She squeezed his hand. "I'm just trying to know you." Draco's eyes searched hers, looking for the lie, looking for the pity. He found neither. He found only a fierce, stubborn curiosity and a warmth that terrified him. He leaned in. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was gravity. Hermione didn't retreat. She tilted her head, her pulse hammering in her throat. Draco paused when he was inches away. He could smell her. Vanilla, old paper, and the sharp scent of the tea. He could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. He wanted to kiss her. The desire was a physical ache, a hunger that had been starving for years. But more than that, he wanted to belong here. He wanted to be part of the clutter, part of the warmth. If he kissed her now, he would cross a line that could never be uncrossed. And if he crossed it, he might destroy the only sanctuary he had left. "Granger," he breathed, his breath ghosting over her lips. "Hermione," she corrected, her voice barely audible. "Hermione." The name sounded foreign on his tongue, intimate and heavy. He raised his free hand, his fingers grazing her cheekbone, trailing down to her jaw. His touch was revered, shaking slightly. "You have no idea," he whispered, "how dangerous it is to let me in." "I trust my wards," she said, a small, brave smile touching her lips. "The ones you just built." Draco let out a huff of laughter, a startled, genuine sound. It broke the spell, just enough. He pulled back, creating a sliver of distance. He didn't let go of her hand, but he retreated from the precipice of the kiss. "They are excellent wards," he agreed, his voice thick. He squeezed her hand one last time, tight, possessive, before releasing it. He stood up, the loss of contact leaving Hermione cold. "I should go," Draco said. He adjusted his cuffs, the mask sliding back into place, though it was thinner now, translucent. "I have things to attend to." "Draco," Hermione said, standing up as well. He paused at the fireplace, looking back at her. He looked tragic and beautiful in the firelight, a prince of shadows in her bright, messy living room. "Same time next week?" she asked. It was an olive branch, a structure. Draco's expression softened. "Perhaps, if your security standards remain this appalling." He stepped into the green flames. "Good night, Hermione." "Good night, Draco." He vanished. Hermione stood alone in the silence, but the room didn't feel empty anymore. The air hummed with the silver resonance of his magic, wrapping around her, holding the world at bay. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the glass. The reflection showed a woman who looked flushed, alive and terrified. He had left, but he had left his mark. The wards were not just protection, they were a claim. He had wrapped her home in his magic. Mine. The silver energy seemed to whisper. Safe. Hermione touched her cheek where his fingers had lingered. She realized then that the slow burn was over. The fire had caught. And now she had to decide whether to let it warm her or burn the house down. The warmth of the wards Draco had woven around Hermione's flat lingered like a phantom limb, a secret hum of silver magic that greeted her every time she crossed her threshold. For 3 days, that hum had been a promise. It had fueled a quiet, dangerous hope that the man who had stood in her living room, vulnerable and exhausted, was the reality, and the cold, sneering aristocrat was merely the armor. On Tuesday morning, in the cavernous, judgment-filled amphitheater of Courtroom 10, the armor was back, and it was impenetrable. The Wizengamot was in full session. The air was stagnant, recycled for centuries, tasting of dust, dry ink, and the sour sweat of nervousness. Torches burned in iron brackets, casting long, flickering shadows that danced across the severe faces of the lords and ladies seated in the high tiers. Hermione stood at the podium in the centre of the stone pit. She was arguing for the Restricted Artifacts Transparency Act, a piece of legislation she had poured months of her life into. It was designed to force old families to register dark objects, to bring the shadows into the light. The danger lies not in the object itself, Hermione said, her voice clear and projecting to the highest row, but in the secrecy that allows it to fester. By cataloguing these items, we do not confiscate history. We ensure it doesn't repeat itself. She paused, looking up at the tiers. She sought one face. Draco Malfoy sat in the Malfoy family seat, a dark stain against the lighter robes of the moderate faction. He looked impeccable, lethal. His posture was rigid, his chin tilted up in that familiar angle of hereditary disdain. He was not looking at her. He was studying a quill he was twirling between his long, pale fingers. The silence in the room was heavy. "An eloquent speech, Miss Granger," a voice drawled from the shadows. Draco stopped twirling the quill. He stood up. The movement was fluid, commanding attention without demanding it. The rustle of his silk robes was the only sound in the vast chamber. Hermione's heart gave a traitorous squeeze. She expected support, or if not support, then a neutral silence. They were partners. They had held hands in the dark. He had warded her home. Draco looked down at her. His eyes were empty. The grey was flat, like slate under a winter sky. There was no recognition, no shared secret. "Eloquent," he repeated, his voice echoing off the stone walls, cold and smooth as polished glass. But ultimately, dangerously naive. A murmur rippled through the court. Hermione felt the blood drain from her face. "Naive?" she challenged, gripping the edges of the podium. "Mr. Malfoy, the statistics clearly show—" "Statistics," Draco cut her off, his voice sharpening to a blade's edge. "You speak of dark magic as if it is a library book that has been misplaced. You wish to catalogue curses. You wish to put labels on malice." He laughed, a short, humourless sound that chilled the room. "You cannot regulate what you do not understand, Granger. And despite your academic enthusiasm, you do not understand this." He was using his heritage as a weapon. He was standing there, the reformed Death Eater, telling the room that the war heroine was a child playing with fire. "The privacy of the ancient houses is not a whim," Draco continued, turning to address the Wizengamot, dismissing her entirely. "It is a containment measure. If you force these artifacts into the light, if you register them, you create a map for every aspiring dark wizard to find them. Miss Granger's proposal is not a safeguard. It is a shopping list for the next Voldemort." The room erupted. Shouts of agreement from the Conservative bloc drowned out the protests from the Progressives. The gavel banged, a dull, thunderous sound, but the damage was done. He had twisted her logic, inverted her intent, and painted her as reckless. Hermione stared at him, stunned. It wasn't just a political disagreement. It was a public evisceration. Draco sat down. He adjusted his cuffs. He didn't look at her once. 2 hours later, the session was adjourned. The bill was dead, sent back to committee to be buried in red tape. Hermione walked through the atrium of the ministry, her heels clicking a furious rhythm against the black tiles. She wasn't going to her office. She was hunting. She found him in a secluded alcove near the Flu network, a quiet corner usually reserved for illicit dealings. He was standing by an enchanted window that looked out onto a false, stormy seascape, staring at the grey waves. He was alone. "Why?" The word tore out of her throat, raw and shaking. Draco didn't turn. He kept his hands clasped behind his back. "You'll have to be more specific, Granger. I make many decisions before lunch." "Don't play games with me," Hermione hissed, stepping into the alcove. The air around him felt cold, noticeably cooler than the rest of the atrium. "You humiliated me in there. You destroyed months of work. And for what? To protect a few dusty heirlooms?" "To protect you," he said. He turned then. The mask was still in place, but there was a hairline fracture in it. His eyes were tired, ringed with exhaustion that makeup charms couldn't hide. "Protect me?" Hermione let out a breathless, incredulous laugh. "By calling me naive in front of the entire government, by siding with the people who hate me, by stopping you from painting a target on your back." Draco stepped forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The aggression flared, sudden and hot. "Do you think the families holding those artifacts would just hand over their registries? Do you think they would write polite letters of complaint?" He loomed over her, boxing her in against the wall, but this time there was no seduction in the proximity. It was intimidation. "They would have hurt you, Hermione," he said, the name slipping out before he could catch it. "If that bill passed, you would have been the face of their exposure. And accidents happen. People disappear." "I can take care of myself," Hermione argued, though her voice wavered. "I fought in a war, Draco. And you won," he spat. "Which makes you think you're invincible. You're not. You're fragile. You bleed just like the rest of us. So, you decided to crush me yourself, to save them the trouble." "Better the devil you know," he murmured. He looked at her mouth, then away, as if the sight physically pained him. "I killed the bill. The heat is off you. You're welcome." "I didn't ask for your help," Hermione said, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "And I certainly didn't ask for your protection. Friday night, I thought we were building something. I thought you trusted me." Draco flinched. It was subtle, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of the eyelids, but she saw it. "Friday night," he said, his voice going flat and dead, "was a mistake." The words landed like stones. Hermione took a step back. "What?" "I was tired," Draco said, reciting the lines he had clearly rehearsed. "I was drunk. I was feeling sentimental. It was a lapse in judgment, Granger. Nothing more." He was lying. She could feel it. She could feel the connection between them, the hum of the wards he had placed, the memory of his hand in hers. But he was burying it. He was pouring concrete over it, sealing it away. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I do," Draco lied. He straightened his spine, pulling the full weight of the Malfoy name around him like a cloak. "We are not compatible. We are on opposite sides of the room, literally and metaphorically. You want to save the world with paperwork. I just want to survive it." He looked at her with a chilling finality. "Do not mistake a moment of weakness for a change of heart. I am not a hero, Granger, and I am certainly not your friend." He was doing it. He was cutting the tether. He was looking at the woman he wanted more than breath, and he was pushing her away with both hands because he was terrified that his world, the dark, complicated, dangerous world of the Malfoys, would swallow her whole if he let her get any closer. Hermione stared at him. The hurt was a physical ache in her chest, sharp and deep, but beneath the hurt, something else was hardening. She saw the fear in his eyes. She saw the way his hand trembled at his side just once before he clenched it into a fist. "You're a coward, Draco," she said softly. It wasn't an insult. It was a diagnosis. Draco's face paled, but he didn't deny it. "Yes," he rasped. "I am. Remember that." He stepped around her. He didn't look back. He walked out of the alcove, his black robes billowing behind him, leaving her alone in the fake grey light of the stormy window. Hermione stood there for a long time. The humiliation of the courtroom had faded, replaced by a much colder realization. He hadn't betrayed her to hurt her. He had betrayed her to save her, and that was infinitely harder to forgive. She reached into her pocket and gripped her wand. She could still feel the wards on her flat, pulsing faintly in the back of her mind. Safe. Mine. "You can lie to me," she whispered to the empty air. "But you can't lie to the magic." She straightened her jacket, wiped the moisture from her under eyes, and walked back toward the lifts. The seesaw had tipped. He had pushed her away. But Draco had forgotten one crucial thing about Hermione Granger. She never gave up on a cause she believed in. And for the first time, she was starting to realize that the cause wasn't the legislation. It was him. December in London was a bruise of a month, dark, aching, and relentlessly cold. The festive cheer of Diagon Alley, with its singing holly wreaths and enchanted snow, did not extend to the twisting, shadowed artery of Nocturne Alley. Here, the snow was grey before it hit the cobblestones, stained by the soot of illicit hearths and the grime of dark intent. Hermione Granger pulled her cloak tighter, the heavy wool offering little protection against the biting wind or the sensation of eyes tracking her movement. She should not be here. She knew this. But the rejection in the Wizengamot had not extinguished her resolve. It had calcified it. If she couldn't regulate the artifacts through legislation, she would track them through the black market. She was standing outside Borgin and Burke's, the shop window displaying a withered hand on a velvet cushion. She was waiting for a contact, a fence who claimed to have the manifest of the Knott family's lost vault. "Looking for a gift, Mudblood?" The voice was a rasp, wet and ugly. Hermione stiffened, her hand instantly finding her wand inside her pocket. She turned slowly. 3 men stood blocking the narrow exit of the alley. They weren't Death Eaters. They lacked the fanaticism. But they were scavengers, snatchers who hadn't found a new trade. One of them, a man with a rot-blackened tooth, stepped forward, twirling a crude knife. "I'm waiting for someone," Hermione said, her voice steady, clipped. "And I am an aura consultant. Walk away." "Consultant," the man mocked, stepping closer. The smell of stale gin and unwashed bodies rolled off him. "Consultants don't carry badges, and they don't have backup in this part of town." He was right. She was alone. A tactical error born of frustration and pride. "I don't need a badge to disarm you," Hermione warned, drawing her wand. The tip glowed with a threatening red spark. The man lunged. It was a clumsy attack, easy to deflect. Hermione cast a silent protego, the air shimmering as the knife bounced off the shield. But as she moved to stun him, the shadows behind the men seemed to coalesce. A figure emerged from the darkness of the shop's recessed doorway. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply stepped into the erratic light of the street lamp, and the temperature in the alley dropped 10 degrees. "Gentlemen," the word was spoken softly, with a boredom that was more terrifying than any shout. The scavengers froze. The man with the knife turned, eyes widening as they landed on the newcomer. Draco Malfoy stood in the snow. He wore a long coat of dragon hide leather, the collar turned up against the wind. He wasn't holding a wand. He held a silver cane, leaning on it casually, looking at the scene with an expression of mild distaste, as if he had stepped in something unpleasant. "Malfoy," the scavenger muttered, lowering the knife. The name carried weight here. It meant money. It meant influence. It meant the kind of dark magic these men only dreamed of wielding. "You're blocking the pavement," Draco drawled. He walked forward, the silver tip of his cane clicking rhythmically against the stone. He didn't look at Hermione. "And you are bothering my associate." "Didn't know she was with you," the man grunted, backing away. "She's a Granger. She is currently under my purview," Draco interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. "Which means, if you scratch her, I will be forced to skin you. And it is far too cold for manual labor." He reached into his coat, and the men flinched. But he only withdrew a heavy pouch of coins. He tossed it. It hit the scavenger's chest with a heavy thud. "For your trouble," Draco said, "vanish." The men didn't hesitate. They scrambled for the gold and dissolved into the shadows, like rats scuttling back to the sewer. Hermione stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a wash of humiliation and a different kind of fear. Draco turned to her. The boredom was gone. In its place was a fury so cold it burned. He didn't speak. He stepped into her personal space, grabbed her upper arm with a grip that bordered on painful, and twisted on his heel. The world compressed. The sensation of apparition was suffocating, a hook behind the navel, dragging her through the ether. They landed hard on a polished wooden floor. Hermione stumbled, but Draco didn't let go. He dragged her forward, releasing her only to slam a heavy oak door shut and ward it with a slash of his wand. "Are you insane?" The shout tore out of him, echoing off the high ceilings. Hermione spun around. They were in a penthouse apartment, sleek, modern, dimly lit. A wall of glass looked out over the Thames. It was his private sanctuary, a place far from the manor. "Don't you dare yell at me!" Hermione shouted back, the shock turning into defensive anger. "I had it under control." "Under control?" Draco stalked toward her, tossing his cane onto a velvet sofa. He looked unhinged. His hair was windblown, his chest heaving. "You were cornered by 3 snatchers in Nocturne Alley at midnight. You weren't under control, Granger. You were under siege." "I am a war heroine," Hermione screamed, throwing her hands up. "I can handle 3 thugs." And what if they had been hit wizards? What if they had been Knott's private security? Draco was in her face now, invading her space, his grey eyes wild. "You think because you beat Riddle, you're immortal. You're not. You are flesh and blood and incredibly, stupidly breakable." "I have to do my job." Hermione pushed him back, her hands slamming against his chest. He didn't budge. "You killed my Bill. You took away the legal way to stop them, so I had to find another way. This is your fault." "I killed the Bill to save your life," Draco roared. He grabbed her wrists, pinning them against his chest, holding her hands over his racing heart. "Do you not understand? Do you not see it?" "See what?" Hermione demanded, struggling against his grip. "See that you're a coward who hides behind politics? See that I am terrified." The confession shattered the argument. Draco's voice broke on the last word. He stopped fighting her. He just held her wrists, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. He was shaking. "I am terrified," he whispered, the words ragged. "Every time you walk out of that office, I wonder if it's the last time I see you. I wonder which one of my father's old friends is going to decide that you're a nuisance that needs removing." Hermione went still. Her breath caught in her throat. She could feel the heat radiating off him, the desperate, frantic rhythm of his heart beneath her palms. "Draco," she breathed. "I can't do it, Hermione," he murmured, his eyes closed. "I can't watch you die. I can't be the one who survives again, not if it's you." He pulled back slightly, looking at her. The barriers were down. The walls of the manor, the sneer of the pureblood, the indifference. It was all gone. There was only Draco, raw, broken, and completely hers. "You said we weren't friends," Hermione whispered, her voice trembling. "You said you weren't a hero." "I lied," he rasped. He let go of her wrists, his hands moving up to cup her face. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, reverent and possessive. "I lie to you constantly, because if I told you the truth, if I told you that you are the only thing that feels real in this entire godforsaken world, you would run." "Try me," she challenged, tears spilling over her lashes. Draco stared at her, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. He found only fire. "You are so stubborn," he groaned, a mixture of frustration and adoration. He lowered his head. This time there was no interruption, no bursting runestones, no ringing bells. His lips crashed onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was weeks of repressed anger, years of history, and a desperate, starving need. Draco kissed her like he was drowning, and she was oxygen. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, deepening the angle. Hermione made a small sound in the back of her throat and melted into him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, erasing the space between them. He tasted of winter and peppermint and whiskey. He tasted like the storm she had been waiting for. He walked her backward until her legs hit the edge of the sofa and they collapsed onto it, a tangle of limbs and heavy cloaks. Draco was over her, his weight a heavy, grounding comfort. He broke the kiss to bury his face in her neck, inhaling sharply. "You scared me," he mumbled against her skin, his lips grazing the sensitive spot below her ear. "You scared me to death." "I'm sorry," Hermione whispered, her fingers threading through his platinum hair, messing it up, claiming it. "But I'm not stopping, Draco. I'm not going to stop fighting." Draco lifted his head. His lips were swollen, his eyes dark and blown wide. "I know," he said. He looked resigned, but also resolved. "I know you won't. You're a Gryffindor. You have a pathological need to run into the fire." He kissed her again, slower this time, a searing, bruising claim. "So," he murmured against her mouth, "I suppose I will have to burn the world down before you get there." Hermione pulled back just an inch, looking into his eyes. "Is that an offer of alliance, Malfoy?" "No," Draco said, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Alliances are for politics. This—" He pressed his hips against hers, letting her feel the undeniable reality of his desire. "This is a surrender." He sat up, pulling her with him until she was straddling his lap. The air in the penthouse was thick with magic and tension, but the cold was gone. "You stay here tonight," he commanded. It wasn't a question. "I'm not letting you out of my sight." "I have work tomorrow," Hermione protested weakly, though she made no move to leave. "I own the building where you work," Draco deadpanned. "I'll write you a note." Hermione laughed, a startled, breathless sound that seemed to surprise them both. Draco's expression softened, the corner of his mouth ticking up in a genuine, crooked smile. "There," he said softly. "That sound. I want to keep that." He reached out and began to undo the clasp of her cloak. His fingers were steady now, efficient and gentle. He slid the heavy wool from her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. "I am still angry with you," he said, unbuttoning his own coat. "Just so we are clear." "I'm furious with you," Hermione agreed, leaning in to kiss the corner of his jaw. "You're arrogant and controlling." "And you," Draco said, capturing her lips once more, "are entirely mine." The words hung in the air. Not a question, not a threat, but a fact. And for the first time in her life, Hermione Granger didn't want to argue. She simply closed her eyes and let herself be held, realizing that the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full. The morning light over the Thames was not golden. It was a pale, spectral white that washed out the colours of the world. In the master bedroom of Draco Malfoy's penthouse, the silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic, distant hum of the city waking up below. Hermione lay in the centre of a bed that was too large for one person, but perfect for the sprawling mess of limbs they had become. She was alone now. The sheets on the left side were cold, but the pillow still held the scent of him. Cedar, ozone, and the faint metallic tang of expensive soap. She sat up, pulling the duvet against her chest. Her body ached, a pleasant, heavy ache that lived in her muscles and her skin. She traced the line of her collarbone, remembering the heat of his mouth there, the desperation of his hands. Last night had been a breaking point, a collapse of walls. She had surrendered, and he had caught her. "Draco," she called out softly. No answer. Hermione slid out of bed, finding one of his discarded dress shirts on the floor. She slipped it on. It engulfed her, the cuffs hanging past her fingertips, the hem hitting her mid-thigh. It smelled like safety. She walked out into the open-plan living area. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of a grey, weeping London. The room was empty. On the sleek, black marble island of the kitchen, a single cup of coffee sat under a stasis charm, steaming gently. Beside it, a note written in sharp, elegant script. "Had to handle the cleanup. Stay inside. The wards are keyed to your magical signature. Do not leave. D. Handle the cleanup." The phrase sent a shiver of unease down her spine. It was so clinical, so cleaner. Hermione took the coffee, warming her hands around the ceramic, and wandered toward the study area she had glimpsed last night. She shouldn't snoop. She knew that. They had established a truce, a fragile intimacy built on the ruins of their rivalry. Trust was the mortar holding it together. But Hermione Granger was, by nature, a seeker of truth, and the cleanup worried her. Draco's desk was a slab of obsidian, terrifyingly neat. No loose parchment, no scattered quills. Just a heavy black leather ledger bound in silver. It looked old. It looked like something that belonged in the manor, not this modern glass box. She set the coffee down. She shouldn't touch it. She reached out. The cover was cold to the touch. She opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was a transaction log. Her eyes scanned the columns, the dates, the items. The air left her lungs in a sharp, painful rush. Item 402, the cursed opal necklace. Seller, Borgin. Buyer, DLM. Item 409, Hand of Glory. Seller, Not Estate. Buyer, DLM. Item 415, Vial of Basilisk Venom, Residue. Seller, Burke. Buyer, DLM. The list went on. Pages of it. Every dark object she had been hunting for the Ministry. Every artifact she had tried to regulate with her failed bill. Every dangerous, cursed item that had disappeared from the black market in the last 6 months. They hadn't disappeared. Draco had bought them. He wasn't protecting her from the trade. He was the trade. I see you've found the inventory. The voice came from the doorway. It was quiet, resigned, and devoid of the warmth that had been there hours ago. Hermione spun around. Draco stood there. He was still wearing the clothes from last night. The black trousers, the white shirt unbuttoned at the top. But he looked different. He looked harder. There was a smear of ash on his cheekbone, and his knuckles were raw. Draco, she whispered, her hand hovering over the ledger. What is this? He walked into the room, not approaching her, but moving to the liquor cabinet. He poured himself a glass of water, his hand steady. It is exactly what it looks like, he said, taking a sip. A list of acquisitions. You... Hermione's voice trembled. She pointed at the book. You bought them? All of them? The necklace? The knot poisons? Yes. Why? The word was a plea. She wanted him to say he was undercover. She wanted him to say he was working for Shacklebolt on a secret assignment. Tell me you're turning them in. Tell me you're building a case. Draco turned to face her, leaning back against the cabinet. The grey light from the window cast half his face in shadow. I am not turning them in, he said calmly. And I am not building a case. I am removing them from circulation. By hoarding them? Hermione stepped forward, the shirt billowing around her. Draco, this is illegal. Possession of Class A dark artifacts carries a mandatory sentence in Azkaban. You are sitting on a stockpile of dark magic. And where would you like me to put them, Granger? His voice rose slightly, the edge of frustration cutting through. In the Ministry evidence lockers, where they will be stolen by the next corrupt undersecretary within a week. Or perhaps I should destroy them. Do you know what happens when you try to incinerate a cursed opal? It releases a vapor that liquefies the lungs of anyone in a 3-mile radius. So you keep them? She countered, her anger rising to meet his. You just collect them? Like trophies? Like toxic waste? Draco slammed the glass down, the sound cracking the silence. I am containing them. I have the only vaults in Britain strong enough to hold the containment fields. I am spending my fortune, my inheritance, buying this filth so that Nott and his cronies can't use it against people like you. He breathed heavily, staring at her with burning eyes. I am buying your safety, Hermione, one cursed object at a time. Hermione stared at him. The logic was twisted, arrogant, and undeniably Slytherin. He wasn't fighting the darkness with light. He was fighting it with money and secrets. He was becoming the thing he hated to destroy it. You should have told me, she said, her voice shaking. We are partners. You let me chase ghosts for months while you held the evidence in your pocket. Because I knew you would react like this. Draco gestured to her, to the fear in her eyes. You are righteous, Hermione. You believe in the law. You believe in the system. I know the system is broken because my father bought it for 20 years. I couldn't tell you because you would have tried to stop me. You would have tried to do it the right way, and you would have gotten yourself killed. So, you decided for me? Hermione asked quietly. The betrayal stung worse than the lie. You decided I wasn't strong enough to handle the truth, that I needed to be managed. I decided, Draco said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, that I would rather have you hate me and be alive than love me and be dead. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Hermione looked at the ledger, then back at him. She saw the raw knuckles. "Where were you this morning?" she asked, a new dread forming in her stomach. "Who did you clean up?" Draco's expression shut down. The shutters came down over his eyes, turning them opaque. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Draco, I paid a visit to the men who cornered you in the alley," he said flatly, "and their employer." Hermione's hand flew to her mouth. "What did you do?" "I ensured they would never touch you again." "Did you kill them?" The question was a whisper, terrified of the answer. Draco looked at her. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing. "I didn't have to," he said finally. "I am a Malfoy. I can destroy a man's life without ever lifting a wand. I bought their debts. I bought their homes. I own them now. They are gone, Hermione." He stepped toward her, reaching out a hand. "I did it for you." Hermione flinched. She retreated a step, pulling the oversized shirt tighter around herself. The movement was instinctive, a reflex of repulsion. Draco froze. His hand dropped to his side. The hurt that flashed across his face was naked and devastating. It was the look of a child who had brought a dead bird to his mother, expecting praise, and received only horror. "I see," he murmured. The ice was back. The armor slid into place, clanking shut. I'm not ungrateful," Hermione stammered, tears stinging her eyes. "But this, Draco, this is fear. This isn't a relationship. It's a cage. You're walling me in. You're buying the bad guys. You're hoarding the curses. You're warding the flat. You're trying to control everything because you're terrified. And you're naive," Draco snapped, the anger returning as a shield. "You think you can love a reformed Death Eater and not get your hands dirty. This is who I am, Granger. I operate in the shadows. I use what I have. I am not Potter. I cannot cast a Patronus and save the day with happy thoughts. I save the day by being worse than the thing coming for you." He turned away from her, walking to the window, staring out at the grey city. "I thought..." He paused, his voice cracking. "I thought after last night you saw me, the real me." "I did," Hermione said, her heart breaking. "I saw the man who held me in the storm. But this man, the man who buys people, I don't know him." "They are the same man," Draco said bitterly to the glass. He turned back to her. His face was composed, beautiful, and devastatingly distant. "You should go." Hermione blinked. "What?" "Leave," Draco said. He didn't shout. He sounded exhausted. "Take your clothes. Go back to your flat. Go back to your office and your bills and your clean, moral world." "Draco, we can talk about this. We can find a way." "There is no way," he exploded, the control finally shattering. "Don't you get it? I will not change. I cannot stop protecting you, and I will not use your methods because they don't work. And you..." You cannot accept my methods because they violate your precious principles." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We were a fantasy, Hermione. A frantic, desperate fantasy born of adrenaline and loneliness. But the sun is up now." He walked over to the desk, picked up the ledger and slammed it shut. "Go." Hermione stood there, trembling. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream at him that he was wrong, that they could compromise. But the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't anger, it was resignation. He had already mourned them. He was pushing her out of the path of the falling rubble. She turned and walked to the bedroom. She dressed in silence, her hands shaking so hard she could barely button her blouse. She found her wand. She found her shoes. When she came back out, Draco was sitting on the sofa, staring into the cold fireplace. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand, the knuckles white. He didn't look up. "The wards on your flat remain," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Don't try to dismantle them. You won't be able to." "Goodbye, Draco," she whispered. He believed he was the darkness that would extinguish her light. But what does his opinion matter when fate has a mind of its own? Shh! The rain against the enchanted glass ceiling of the ministry atrium didn't tap. It thrummed, a heavy, rhythmic bass note beneath the soaring soprano of string quartets and polite laughter. It was the night of the Winter Solstice Gala, an event designed to look like a celebration, but felt, to Hermione Granger, remarkably like an inspection. The air was thick, perfumed with winter roses, expensive cologne, and the ozone scent of high-grade preservation charms. Thousands of floating candles drifted like golden constellations above the heads of the wizarding elite, casting a soft, flattering light that smoothed wrinkles and hid lies. Hermione stood near the center of the room, a flute of champagne warming in her hand, feeling entirely too visible. She wore deep emerald velvet, a concession to the festive season, the fabric clinging to her frame in a way that felt foreign, exposing the slope of her shoulders to the cool draft of the hall. "You really are the architect of the new era, aren't you, Hermione?" The voice was warm, rich, and too close. Julian Vance, a senior undersecretary with a smile that had graced the cover of Witch Weekly 3 times this year, stepped into her personal space. He was handsome in a conventional, sun-drenched way, sandy hair, easy charm, a laugh that invited everyone to join in. He was safe, he was acceptable, and he was currently placing a hand on the small of her back. Hermione stiffened, a microscopic reaction she hoped he wouldn't notice. The heat of his palm seeped through the velvet, possessive and presumptive. "Hardly an architect, Julian," she deflected, forcing a tight smile. "Just someone trying to ensure the foundation doesn't crumble again." "Always so modest." Julian laughed, leaning in. He smelled of spiced rum and confidence. His fingers splayed slightly, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin just above her hip. "It's charming, but you need to learn to take a compliment. Tonight, for instance, you look absolutely devastating." He lowered his voice on the last word, turning a professional observation into an intimate whisper. It was a well-rehearsed move. Hermione felt the weight of the room's attention. They were a tableau, the war heroine and the rising political star. A perfect match. Across the room, in the shadows cast by a towering marble pillar, Draco Malfoy watched. He stood with the stillness of a statue, dressed in black robes, cut with a severity that made him look like a sleek, dangerous weapon amidst the colourful plumage of the other guests. He held a tumbler of fire whiskey, the amber liquid untouched. His eyes, cold and pale as winter ice, were fixed on the hand resting on Hermione's waist. He felt a familiar, corrosive acid rise in his throat. It wasn't anger. Anger was hot, impulsive, Gryffindorish. This was something colder. It was a precise, agonizing clarity. He watched Vance lean closer to her ear. He saw the subtle tension in Hermione's jaw, the way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She was smiling, but her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for air. Vance didn't see it. Vance saw a prize to be won. He didn't see the exhaustion etched into the corners of her eyes or the way she shifted her weight, ready to flee. He didn't know her. I know her, Draco thought, the thought ringing like a bell in the silence of his mind. The jealousy that gripped him wasn't a fire. It was a vice. It tightened his chest, constricting his breath. He hated the way Vance touched her with such ease, such entitlement. But more than that, he hated the distance between himself and her, a chasm built of years of history, prejudice, and his own cowardly silence. He could stay here. He could finish his drink, turn on his heel, and leave. That was the Malfoy way. Observe, judge, withdraw. Vance whispered something else, and Hermione laughed, a brittle, high sound that grated on Draco's nerves. Vance's hand moved, sliding just an inch higher. The vice in Draco's chest snapped. He set his glass down on a passing tray with a deliberate clink. The sound was soft, but for him it was a gavel falling. He adjusted his cufflinks, silver snakes biting their own tails, and stepped out of the shadows. He didn't rush. He moved through the crowd like smoke, fluid and inevitable. People parted for him, instinctually sensing the shift in the air. The temperature seemed to drop around him, the golden warmth of the party chilling into something sharper, more alert. He approached them from behind, his gaze never leaving the back of Vance's neck. "I hope I'm not interrupting a state secret," Draco said. His voice was low, smooth, and laced with a deadly kind of politeness. Vance jumped slightly, his hand falling from Hermione's back as he turned. Hermione spun around, and for a fleeting second, the mask of polite tolerance dropped from her face, replaced by genuine surprise. Her eyes met Draco's, and he saw the sudden intake of breath, the dilation of her pupils. "Malfoy," Vance said, his smile faltering before he pasted it back on. "We were just discussing the upcoming legislative session." "Fascinating," Draco drawled, stepping into the circle of their conversation. He didn't look at Vance. He looked entirely, exclusively at Hermione. "Because I was under the impression, Granger, that we needed to review the rune sequences for the intricate warding on the archives. Unless, of course, you've decided to let the Department of Mysteries handle the entropy calculations." It was nonsense. Or at least, it was work that didn't need to be discussed at a gala. But it was a language only they spoke. It was a reference to late nights in the library, to shared coffees, to the reluctant, fragile partnership they had built over the last 2 years. Hermione stared at him. She saw the tension in his jaw, the rigidity of his posture. She saw the way he was ignoring Vance completely, dismissing the other man's existence with effortless arrogance. "The entropy calculations," she repeated, her voice steadying. She understood. "Yes, I was concerned about the third variable. As you should be, Draco said softly. He took a half-step closer, invading the space Vance had been occupying moments ago. But unlike Vance, Draco didn't touch her. He didn't need to. His presence was a physical weight, surrounding her, shielding her. Vance, you'll excuse us. Technical matters. Terribly dry. Vance looked between them, sensing a current he couldn't navigate. He looked at Hermione, waiting for her to dismiss Malfoy, to return to the warmth of his flirtation. Hermione didn't look back at him. It is important, Julian. I'm sorry. Excuse me. She stepped toward Draco. It was a choice. A small one, but a choice nonetheless. Draco offered her his arm. It was a formal gesture, stiff and proper, but his eyes were burning. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then laid her hand on his forearm. Her fingers were warm against the cool wool of his sleeve. The contact sent a shockwave up his arm, settling heavily in his gut. "Shall we?" he murmured. He led her away, cutting a path through the throng. He didn't speak as they navigated the room, his expression stony, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He was acutely aware of the heat of her body next to his, the rustle of her velvet dress, the scent of her perfume, vanilla and old parchment, rising above the cloying roses of the gala. He guided her not toward the offices, but toward the large glass doors that led to the semi-private observation balcony. "Draco," she whispered, as the noise of the party began to fade behind them. "The archives are closed." "I know," he said, his voice rougher now. He pushed the doors open. The sound of the rain exploded around them, muffled only slightly by the overhead shielding charms. The air out here was cold, crisp and clean. The city of London sprawled below them, a grid of wet, glittering lights through the storm. He let the heavy doors swing shut, sealing them off from the warmth and the music. The silence that followed was sudden and heavy. Draco finally turned to face her. He didn't let go of her arm immediately. He looked down at her, his grey eyes searching her face, cataloguing every detail. The flush on her cheeks, the way a loose curl had fallen across her forehead, the pulse beating rapidly in her throat. "You looked like you were drowning," he said quietly. Hermione let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for an hour. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself, though the chill wasn't entirely from the cold. "He's persistent," she admitted, leaning back against the stone railing. The damp wind whipped at the hem of her dress. "He's a good man, Draco. He means well." "He's a bore," Draco corrected sharply, stepping closer. "And he doesn't know when to stop touching what doesn't belong to him." The words hung in the air, dangerous and unspoken. Hermione looked up, her eyes widening. "What doesn't belong to him?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "And what does that imply, exactly?" Draco froze. The mask threatened to slip. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to say that Vance looked at her and saw a trophy, but Draco looked at her and saw the only person who made the world make sense. He wanted to say that watching another man's hands on her made him want to burn the ministry to the ground. But he couldn't. Not yet. He wasn't the hero of this story. He was the villain who had been granted a reprieve, and he was terrified that one wrong move would shatter the fragile truce between them. So he retreated just an inch. He built the wall back up, but he left a window open. "It implies," Draco said, his voice lowering to a husky timbre, That you are not a public monument, Granger. You don't have to let people climb all over you just because they voted for you. He reached out then. It was a slow, deliberate movement. His hand hovered for a second before his fingers grazed her temple, tucking the stray curl behind her ear. His skin was cool against her burning cheek. He didn't pull away immediately. His fingers lingered on the shell of her ear, his thumb brushing her jawline. It was a touch so light it was almost a ghost, but the intimacy of it was staggering. Hermione stopped breathing. She stared at him, her lips parted, her eyes locked on his. She didn't pull away. She leaned ever so slightly into his hand. "Draco," she breathed. It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. "Stay here," he commanded softly, his eyes dropping to her mouth before snapping back to her eyes. "Stay here where it's quiet. If you go back in there, I can't promise I won't curse him." "You can't curse a senior undersecretary," she whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Watch me," he murmured. He dropped his hand, the loss of contact leaving a cold spot on her skin. He took a step back, giving her air, but his eyes never left hers. The tension between them was a physical thing, a taut wire vibrating in the storm. "I prefer the rain anyway," Hermione said, her voice stronger now, grounded. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the pure-blood sneer he wore like armor. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the protectiveness in his stance. "Good," Draco said. He turned to look out at the city, leaning his elbows on the railing next to her, close enough that their arms brushed. "Then we'll wait." They stood in the silence, the rain hammering against the invisible
I really enjoyed writing to this story. It feels very special to me. I like that it is not just a simple love story. It is about two people who are broken, but they find peace together. Draco is my favorite part in this story. He thinks he is a bad guy. He believes he is too dark for Hermione, but he tries to save her in his own way by buying the dangerous object and scaring the criminals. That is his language of law. He is quiet, protective, and very intense. Hermione is wonderful because she is brave. She does not look at his past, she looks at his heart. She does not want a perfect hero. She wants a real partner. The atmosphere was important too. The rain, the cold ministry, and the warm fire, it shows how they feel inside. The ending makes me happy. They are not the same, but they are a team. The snake and the lion finally relax. It makes my heart feel full.